You know, let me start with Dr. Plummer, Dr. LaNail Plummer, as we talk about this issue of therapy. You know, I think the first thing is that people need to learn how their mind works, and then it helps you develop a greater understanding of yourself.
That's right.
Talk about that.
Absolutely. So mental health, oftentimes people want to separate physical health from mental health, but forgetting that it's all one body. So the things that we eat, the things that we drink all affect our mental health. The things that we see, the things that we experience, our sensory elements are all part of our mental health. So when people are talking about, say, depression or anxiety, it's not just a matter of their circumstances have gotten really challenging or tough. It's also a matter of, when we think about it for medication, what they're consuming and how do we regulate the chemicals that's in their body. Some of this is passed down by genetics, of course, and some of it is learned behaviors from our families. If we have a parent who is depressed but who's never been treated properly for that depression, we then begin to think that the ways that they are moving and living in life is normal, and we mimic that as well. So there's some learned behaviors that's connected to mental health. There's some chemical behaviors or chemical responses that are related to mental health. There's some environmental factors that are related to mental health too, but we have to be mindful that it's all part of our one body. And so it's important to me to highlight that consistently, because people oftentimes want to separate physical health from mental health. If you take a person with a physical health ailment, but you don't necessarily treat their mental health, say diabetes for instance, if a person has depression and diabetes, if you don't treat the depression, the diabetes doesn't get better, right? And so that's a connection to the mental health and the physical health, and seeing it all as one. And there's tons of things, and I hope we get to talk about it tonight, Armstrong, about the different ways we can take care of our bodies and how that can help our mental health as well.
let me have Samantha Silverman join this conversation. You know, I think one of the things, you know, I read a lot, and because of what I do, Ms. Silverman, I interact with a lot of people. I talk with a lot of people. I think what people have difficulty in is managing very difficult emotional challenges, like depression, like anger, like loss. To be able to manage that can really overwhelm them. What can you share with our national audience now? How can they better manage these very difficult emotional challenges, which are going to come? Nobody can escape it.
Yeah.
Sure. Hello there. I believe that grounding techniques would be a really wonderful place to start in managing those extreme emotions. If somebody is not in a safe, grounded area, they can have these extreme emotional reactions. And in order to be grounded, I tell all of my clients to practice deep breathing, to practice relaxation skills such as yoga, jogging, exercise, and to really work out of a place where they can be grounded prior to dealing with these extreme emotional reactions.
Let me go to you, LaNail. You know, how do we help people? You got to help people build healthier habits.
Absolutely.
I think habits is something that is very important. How do you learn to build healthier habits and sort of navigate your mindset at the same time? Because all of it is about a mindset.
Right, absolutely.
No, I'm sorry, my bad. I'm going to Phillip Lewis, I'm sorry.
Phillip, yes, to create a healthy mindset is being very specific in what you're first identifying what you're trying to change, and then setting a small, measurable, and obtainable goal to change that thing. And understanding that sometimes things are simple as creating a new behavior pattern to change or adjust your mood. So these changes that you're trying to make could take some time. We like to say that, oh, I go to therapy once or twice, or have done the counting or the breathing, or did the journal for a week, and my symptoms have only changed for just a bit, not significantly. But the way the brain works, we sometimes have to create enough of a habit that these things become autonomous, and then we can challenge or overcome these difficult situations or experiences that we may have automatically. Just like a negative thought might come up in my mind automatically because I've spent some time beating myself up. I might have to spend some time uplifting or affirming myself in order for those positive thoughts to now become automatic as well.
So Dr. Donohue, You know, one thing that you have to learn in life is about adaptability. They're willing to adjust to change. How do people cope and deal with difficult changes that they face in their lives, and how that contribute to mental health challenges?
Well, Armstrong, first, thanks for including me in this very important conversation. You know, I've had the experience over the years that people in general do adapt. People want to go from less well to more well. And our job in terms of mild to moderate mental illness is to, in a sense, chaperone that effort. Severe mental illness is a different thing entirely, and I think that all our guests this evening would agree that severe mental illness, which principally here means bipolar affective disorder, schizophrenia, and severe depression, those are really things that are best dealt with medically. But it's interesting that in the annals of psychiatry, the number of diagnoses has really recently skyrocketed, and it's been a source of some controversy, Armstrong, because in the more recent DSM manuals, the manuals of psychiatric diseases that are recognized and described, a whole number of rather mild diseases have kind of come to the fore, but the really critical, disastrous, and catastrophic illnesses, again, like schizophrenia and bipolar disease, have to some extent been eclipsed. So I think there's a great deal of room for making wise life choices in managing the kinds of things that you all have been talking about, depression, anxiety, and so forth. But really the crisis that we face now is in those more calamitous circumstances where mental health resources are strained. There's 30,000 psychiatrists today practicing in America. Just think about that. There's 330 million people. So there's very, very few psychiatric physicians. So we really find ourselves in a bit of a tough spot there. And I think there's lots of room to move to improve our performance.
So, you know, Dr. Plummer, if there is one thing that impacts mental health, in my opinion, more than anything else, it's relationships and how you manage those relationships with your children, with your parents, with your friends, with your coworkers, with strangers. You can just meet a stranger, and depending on how the conversation go, it can put you into an emotional roller coaster, or with your partners. And it does surprise me. I have to tell you, it surprises me how much what others think about you can really impact you. I'm not going to say that's a weakness on behalf of a person that allows that to impact them. But I think one of the things that we really have to delve into here tonight is sort of guiding people how to better manage their relationships. And then some relationships are so toxic, you just don't need to be in that relationship. It's just not good for you.
Yes, agreed, absolutely. I do think that it's important for people to pay attention to relationships and how they manage those relationships. You know, from a theoretical perspective, we could think about it in terms of attachment, how those early childhood formations with their primary caregivers, including their parents, were formed. Were their parents paying attention to them? Did they create an anxious type of personality? Did they create an avoidant type of personality? Was it completely disorganized? We find from a theoretical perspective and a clinical perspective that those types of relationships will recur over and over again as a matter of pattern. And so what those early relationships may have looked like, we'll see it repeated in early friendships. We see it repeated in their relationships with their significant others and their spouses, and even their relationships with their coworkers. There's a lot that we can learn in those processes as well. So the attachment that we're referring to can actually be corrected, but it does take a lot of intentionality. And if it is in the childhood, it can take intentionality from the parents and from their teachers. But as we grow older, we can take more ownership in those processes as well. I appreciate that we're having a conversation about therapy, because therapy is one of those places where we can correct those behaviors, where we have increased awareness of what we're doing and why we're doing it, where we're uncovering the roots to determine how we became who we are, and then deciding who we want to be in the next rendition of our lives. So the therapy can help in significant ways and in breaking cycles for the next generation. So there may have been an insecure attachment between a parent and a child, but once that child becomes an adult, they can have the skills and the resources to make the situation better for themselves and their children as well. I do believe that our school systems have some responsibility in that as well. We've taken out a significant part of social emotional learning in the schools, and we're slowly trying to integrate that in as well. But it's important to note that children need explicit language and communication and lessons around social skills, around emotional intelligence, around self-awareness. While we understand that math and history and English as subjects are extremely important, a person lives with themselves for the rest of their lives. So there may be math formulas that they forget about, but they won't forget about how to access their own awareness. There may be particular science formulas that they forget, but they don't necessarily forget how to interact with another person in a disagreement. And so it's important that we reintroduce social emotional learning as a consistent subject matter in our schools.
You know, Ms. Summers, another conclusion I've reached, I really think physical health is so important to deal with. I think when you deal with this physical health, you know, people with this chronic pain, they have these sleep disorders, and it goes back to physical health. Could you speak to that?
So the big issue here is that 83 million Americans do not have a primary care provider. And that can be a combination of either not having insurance or not having the financial means. And out of everybody who cannot access the PCP, those are the people that have the most difficult health conditions to treat. So if you can't get a grasp on your physical health conditions, you can't start treating your mental health condition.
You know, Dr. Donohue, it is a fact that therapy can help you increase your productivity.
It is indeed, and as my colleagues this evening have pointed out, there's lots of arrows in the quiver, lots of ways for us to go from less happy to more happy. You talked just a second ago with Samantha about exercise. It's interesting that from the medical perspective, it turns out that 3 hours of exercise a week predictably results in a 40% all-cause mortality reduction. Just think about that for a second. So it turns out that that exercise as an independent variable has been well studied and has a great bearing on overall sense of well-being and the elusive product of happiness. Turns out that certain forms of meditation have been looked at. In fact, one form was recently recognized by the American Heart Association as a useful therapeutic for reducing high blood pressure. So there's lots of ways for us to do what we were told to do in 2 Corinthians and steward the body. It's interesting to think, though, of happiness as an endpoint. If we took the founders of the nation literally and actually set about to pursue happiness, to chase it like the hound of heaven, I think we would find that lots of the things that my colleagues have spoken about are useful predicates. Leading a good, balanced life, up in the morning early, exercising in the morning. Keeping calories within a certain time frame, not weighing a pound more than what we all weighed or should have weighed at 21. These are the basic kind of guardrails of life, and we can all see that most of us have some work to do to get to those endpoints.
You know, Phillip, I tell you, when you think about mental health and what people endure every day, it seems like they've got a pill, a drug for everything. Let's just medicate everything. You know, I am so proud when I say to people, and I use myself as an example, I have not taken any kind of medicine in over 35 years. None, okay? I exercise, I watch what I eat, and yes, sometimes I have surgery, I'm in pain, but I endure it because I don't want to take medicine. And I know some people need the medicine. I know you need to balance it out, but don't you think we've become an over-medicated society with everything therapy? And how do people balance this out when not to go overboard with the medication?
Right. Statistically, we have, right? That's what the numbers show. However, I do want to make sure that everyone knows that there's nothing wrong with medication, particularly when it comes to stabilization. So
only for me there's something wrong.
Well,
with it,
maybe.
I'm just an exception, not the rule.
For
That's okay.
those of us who have had privileged lives to be able to make time to work out, to have sustaining healthy families, to have been taught coping mechanisms for emotional or physical pain, absolutely, you may not need medication for stabilization. Some who weren't as blessed to get those things or have those experiences, or may have had a life that has exposed them to other things that say you cannot help yourself, that you may need intervention from someone else, whether that's a traumatic experience or a socioeconomic
And that doesn't make a
experience.
person weak, by the way.
It doesn't, no, absolutely
not
not,
at all.
absolutely
No.
not. So when it comes to medication, it's important when we're prescribing or when we're counseling to sometimes distinguish whether this is something that is going to be long-term or something that is to help right now to stabilize whatever physiological or psychological symptoms are presenting. So that way in therapy we can process what's going on to build those skills that you may not have gotten or been able to build earlier on in life. And then once you have that, once you have honed these skills and these techniques to make sure you no longer need it, now we can wean you off, or now we can transition you to more nutritional psychiatry as opposed to pharmaceuticals. So I would agree that yes, over time we have increased the prescriptions and the pills that have been accessible for mental health. But again, we want to be mindful that there's nothing wrong with that. Two, there are some people who may need temporary stability in order to get the skills that you already have that you mentioned with your morning routine and working out and never having to take anything for the 30 years. Until they get there, then that's us, how we can work in the gap, work in that gap to make sure it happens.
How does faith in God and prayer fit into this?
I think faith in anything is beneficial, because what that means is I have the capacity to understand that this will get better. And for some people, that's religion. For some people, that is a practice. For some people, that's a therapist, that's a family member, that's a child, that's a school, that's a goal. It can be a lot of things. But as long as someone has the understanding and the willingness to change, whatever way they find it, I think that's the starting point. And then everything else can help. Everything else can be a tool. There are a lot of things outside of a therapeutic office that can be therapeutic. Does that make sense?
Of course it makes sense, because it makes sense. Now, I want to come to you on something else, Dr. Plummer. Can you explain for us, I'm pivoting to somewhere else here tonight, the connection between mental health issues and homelessness based on your experience at Onyx Therapy Group?
Absolutely. And I think I can make a good connection there based off of what we also just heard from Phillip. One of the things that I heard him talk about specifically was access, right? So we need to be able to have access. And so in your situation, you have access to a gym, a safe gym, maybe some healthy food.
But I don't need a gym. I can go outside. I can exercise right in my house. I don't need anything. People just make excuses.
And maybe that's also because you live in a neighborhood that feels really safe and secure for you.
But
maybe
you can do it in your home. You
secure.
can do 50 push-ups.
Yes, you can.
You can do
those
jumping
things.
jacks.
Yes,
you can do the jumping rope.
You can do those things. What I'm saying, however, is that access is important, right? And so we need to be able to, I think about physical pain, where I had an injury from being in the military, a knee injury. And I could have easily taken pain medication, but instead I went to an acupuncturist so that I could get the support that I needed there, also covered by my insurance. But it meant that I had to understand what acupuncture was. It meant that I had to go find a place. It meant that I had to interview a place. All of that is time consuming, far more time consuming than medication can be. And so where we hear Phillip saying, like, yes, indeed, the country is being, there's more people taking medication than there has in the past, there's a lot of additional reasons for that, including a lack of access. And that's a systemic issue that I believe as well. So making that connection into homelessness, you know, a lot of folks connect mental health to homelessness as if everyone that is homeless has a mental health issue. And that's not necessarily the case. In fact, we understand through our research that about 20 to 25% of people who identify as homeless or who are homeless have a mental health issue, versus 6% of the population who has a mental health issue that it's not homeless. from our clients that we have in Onyx, we recognize that one of the major elements that contribute to homelessness is a lack of family support. And I see that, and having done mental health around the world, having the opportunity to do mental health services in Europe, in the continent of Africa, in South America, recognizing that our systems, our family systems, are so disjointed at times and so individualized that when we recognize that we have a family member that has a mental health disorder, we're likely to put them off. And that starts early on in our special education classes and exclusive classes and things like that. But we recognize that in this country, when somebody is quote unquote different, or they're dealing with a different mental health issue, we put them off to the side and we keep pushing them further and further and further away, and then of course we have results such as homelessness.
Let me get Samantha. You know, we're packing so much into this conversation today.
Sure. So we need economic support so greatly in terms of housing unhoused individuals. And one of your participants said a few minutes ago that it's not always that they have a mental health issue. I believe the statistics are correct that 20% of unhoused individuals do have a severe mental health issue, but that's not the case for all of them. Inflation is rising, the cost of housing is rising, and one of the systemic issues that we have is just a lack of housing. And whether that housing could be buildings going up in communities. For instance, I know there's a project in Cleveland that's happening right now where they are converting a downtown historic building into a permanent homeless community. And whether it's creative facets like that or finding more permanent housing, that would greatly solve the issue of people that are facing homelessness right now.